But first, let me ask you. Help me understand what is stopping you from financially forward thinking. Let's go. Yeah. Wake up, check the bank account. Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new. Generous is what I do. Walking down the leasing street. Cycle that I just repeat. Money rushing left and right. Gone before the end of night. Don't know the
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
It's impressively rap, but it's still a trap. Forward thinking, not too late. Tendency is here to stay. Generous contributions flow. Helping that investment. Real good.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
But first, let me ask you. Help me understand what is stopping you from financially forward thinking. Let's go. Yeah. Wake up, check the bank account. Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new.
All right. We have our special guest in the studio. I'm going to be ordering up for those of you who are perpetuating yourselves in tenant state, just making those generous.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Stopping you from financially forward thinking.
Hey, William.
All right. Can you hear me, Cynthia?
I can hear you, William. How are you?
Doing good and better than most, I would assume. Welcome to our podcast today. We have a very special guest. Special in the sense that, she's from the Old National Bank. And I would assume that you guys have seen her a couple of times making the show. Very, very spectacular, very splendid, very unique, and satisfying your curiosity. Cynthia Theisen, a mortgage loan originator who will be discussing Minnesota Home Buyer Down Payment Assistance Program and the Old National Bank grant. Cynthia, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, William. This is awesome. I really appreciate it. You are an excellent loan officer and an excellent person who really wants to teach your audience what it means to be a homeowner and how it's easy. You just have to be aware. So I'm really grateful for you doing these podcasts.
Once again, thank you very much. Now, let us go to our...
Got it. I'm going to have you go to the first screen there. There you go. Minnesota Home Buyer Down Payment Assistance. Today we're going to talk about Minnesota housing programs, plus companioning the Old National Bank grant with the Minnesota housing programs. And I'm Cynthia Theisen from Old National Bank. I've been doing home mortgages for first-time home buyers for well over 26 years. I love it. That's where I've stayed in that marketplace to help people become homeowners. So I'd like to welcome you to the podcast. We'll go to the next screen there, William.
All right, exactly.
Yes. So
now
go ahead.
That sounds incredibly helpful. Let's start with the basics. Why is down payment assistance so crucial for prospective home buyers?
Right. So it's upfront cash needed to buy a home. Families achieve home ownership. It reduces upfront. It helps more families achieve home ownership. Programs vary by income, location, and loan type. I'm sorry, that screen kind of got off track there. Got one up here on the side. So it reduces upfront cash needed to buy a home. So you don't need that 20% down. But then we talk about 3% down, right? So on a $300,000, 3% down is still $9,000. And on the average, it costs about 3% then for closing costs and prepaid. So now we're talking about $18,000. And people just say, that's too far away in my pocketbook in order to help with home ownership or in order to buy a home. And that's where the down payment assistance comes in and matters. It can come in with $14,000 at Minnesota Housing. And Old National Bank can come in at 3% of the purchase price. So on a $300,000 home, that'd be $9,000. So you got 14 the 9. You know, you got $23,000 of the more than you need in order to get into the house. So then you can end up putting more down and lower your house payment a little bit. The down payment assistance matters because it helps you become a homeowner faster than waiting to try and put that money in your bank account. I also know that from my own experience, let's say I put $200 into the bank. I would go through that period of time where my car knew I had a savings account and was trying to save up, and it would break, and I would have to put money into the car. So we have life that happens, and so being able to have a resource that will help us get into that house so that we can make that house payment instead of somebody else's rent payment becomes helpful to us in becoming homeowners and having something that belongs to us and starts building our wealth.
All right, all right. For those of you who are perpetuating your sales tendency, just making those generous contributions you call rent. Help me understand. As you do the double, back to back, working all the shifts, and then you take the money and place it, dump it into the bank account of your landlord. Help me understand. If you want to do it, it's fine. But Minnesota housing overview, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned Minnesota housing. Could you tell us more about their role in this process?
They are a state agency, William, that helps make buying a home easy. They are easier. They are not the lender. We, such as Old National Bank, are one of the approved lenders, and we help the people become approved to be able to buy the home. So Minnesota's housing is Minnesota State Housing Finance Agency to help homeowners become buyers or owners. It works with approved lenders such as myself, and it's statewide. It isn't just in the metro area. It isn't just in the rural areas. It is statewide, and it supports first-time home buyers and repeat buyers. Let's say I've sold my house and I paid off my debt, and I needed something, I don't know, I needed a new car, and I decided to pay for it instead of buying that next house. Well, guess what? I can still go back to Minnesota Housing, and I can buy the next house with down payment assistance also with Minnesota Housing. So it is not just for the first-time home buyers. It is for first-time home buyers and repeat buyers. So Minnesota Housing has some wonderful programs that help you become a homeowner at whatever stage you're in.
All right, all right.
We're going to go on to the next screen.
Let's go to Minnesota down payment assistance, I would assume, on the next slide.
Yep.
So Minnesota Housing offers various down payment assistance options. Can you elaborate on what those generally entail? Help us understand, Cynthia.
Yep, absolutely. Minnesota Housing has up to $14,000. There's two types. Monthly payment loans, so loans up to $14,000. It's available with the first-time home buyer and the repeat buyer loan programs. It's a 10-year repayment term with an interest rate equal to your first mortgage rate, which is really unheard of on second mortgages. So it will create a second mortgage for that $14,000. It's a monthly payment that you pay back over a 10-year period. So second mortgage, let's say it's $160 a month, and you pay that back over 10 years, and you can pay that off early. You can pay off early and accelerate that, but that's the $14,000 that helped you get into the house for the down payment. There's also a deferred payment loan. For instance, if I'm and I'm going to quickly look here at that program. I'm going to pull up an Excel spreadsheet that I should have had up. I apologize. Oh, okay. If I am a household of 1 to 2 persons, I can earn up to $85,000 a year, and then I can do the deferred down payment assistance loan, where that's also $14,000 or $18,000 for people who are maybe a first generation home buyer, or maybe they have a household of 4 or more people, or a person in the household is receiving disability compensation, or it can be a sole head of household with at least one eligible dependent. Then we can move up to the $18,000 down payment assistance, and this is deferred. So that means it's at zero interest for the entire time you're in the house. When you sell the house, no longer occupy the house like you're going to rent it out, right? Sell the house, no longer occupy it or refinance. That's when that needs to be paid back. But until then, it's an interest-free loan that just sits there waiting for you to make your decisions in life. And that's available with the startup program, which is the first-time homebuyer program. And again, it talks about no interest and no monthly payments. Balloon payments, it's due in full at the end of the mortgage term. So 30 years from now, if I just keep making my payment and stay in the house, at 30 years from now, I would owe that $14,000. And at that point, hopefully your house is paid for. You can just take out a quick little loan for the $14,000 and pay it back. Or maybe you're starting to plan for it. So you put $100 a month away and you have that $14,000 or $18,000 in order to pay it. Remember, it's at 0% interest. So they're not charging you anything in order to have that loan with monthly payment interest. That is interest-free, 0% interest. And although it says that it's due in full at the end of the mortgage term, also when you sell the house, no longer make it your primary residence, or refinance, that's when that also comes due. So it's a great way to get into the house, right, for little monies. Their program requires only a minimum of $1,000 investment. So you've got just $1,000 that you have to put into the loan in order to become a home buyer. And then we work out the numbers. We see, does the next slide will talk about the Old National Bank down payment assistance. Do we piggyback that onto there with you? Or are we going to get...
All right. So in addition to Minnesota Housing, you also mentioned the Old National Bank grant. Now, how does that fit into the picture and what are its key features?
So 3% up to the purchase price, a maximum of $15,000. There are some homes that in select communities that just get an automatic $15,000. I can help you figure out what homes those are. And we can use it with the Home Ready or Home Manager, which are Old National Bank loans, or you can piggyback it with the Minnesota Housing loan, right? So on a $300,000 house, that's $9,000 plus the 14. You're now get $23,000, and you really only needed $18,000 in order to get in. So does that mean you get more money back at closing? No, it doesn't. We just lower the down payment or increase the down payment, or we can lower the down payment assistance that you're receiving from the state of Minnesota. So maybe you only need to borrow $10,000 from them. You get the $9,000 grant because that's 3% of the purchase price from Old National Bank. That's your $19,000. You need $1,000 of your own money. So it's all in how it works for you. And then because we are an authorized Minnesota housing lender, we can piggyback our down payment assistance with the Minnesota Housing loan. And that gives you more money at the closing, more money in order to buy the property. It also is forgiven. The Old National Bank is a forgiven down payment assistance program. Free money. I don't like the word term free money because it's money that we are investing in the community, that we are investing in you in order for you to become a homeowner in your community.
All right. I understand when you say free money because what is free is not considered at all and it is misused. But piggybacking with what Minnesota Housing Program offer a greater financial relief. Now let's talk about what consumer example scenario.
That's what I have next. Absolutely. I just have a scenario here. It's like if you bought a house at $350,000 and you put 3% down. I'm going to make mine just a little bit bigger on my screen so I can see it. So there we go. Then your base loan amount is $332,000. And in this scenario, I put a little bit more down because I had the $14,000 from Minnesota Housing and the $10,000 from Old National Bank. So we were going with a loan purchase price of $345 with the loan amount of $332. You can see that on your screen. And on the left-hand side here, we see an origination fee, appraisal fee, credit report fee, right? There's your title company fees, recording and transfer fees, and your prepaids, taxes, and insurance is all part of that whole scenario. So really, as we go over to the right side here, we see purchase price $345, closing costs $7,516.31, prepaids, taxes, insurance, and interest. That's $5,706. So it's really going to take $358,218 to buy this $345,000 house. Where's that money going to come from? Right now, we would be looking at the subordinate financing of $14,000 from Minnesota Housing. The state deed tax is paid for by the seller. Old National Bank's grant is $10,000 because at $350, 3% would be $10,500, or $345 would be $10,000, a little over $10,000, and our maximum amount is $10,000. The loan amount that we're going to bring in is $332, so we have total credits of $357,178. So you could get into this house that we have modeled here for $1,040.39, right? Principal and interest on that payment would be $2,098.47. I guess the homeowner's insurance at $215 a month, and the real estate taxes are, I guess, at $360 a month. Mortgage insurance is $113.43. I think this particular customer that I modeled here had a 711 credit score. So the total would be $2,786. So $2,800, and they're in a home, a $345,000 home. The Minnesota Housing must be paid back. The Old National Bank is a grant. It's forgiven at the closing table. And you as a buyer bring significantly less cash to closing. And right now in our marketplace, it's harder to get money from the seller in order to pay for closing costs. So utilizing these two together help you get into a home. Sometime in the fall, close to the winter, probably October, November, December, maybe we can also get the seller to contribute a few $1,000s, and then we lower your Minnesota Housing down payment assistance, or we lower the overall loan amount to see what works out best for you. Because we want to utilize the grant and the monies from the seller first before we're going after a second mortgage that you need to pay back. Because we want to be cognizant of that when you go to sell. You want to get as much back out of the house as possible to be able to move on to the next home. Does that make sense, William?
Definitely. For those of you who are perpetuating yourselves in tenancy, just making those generous contributions on a monthly basis, help me understand this 2026. But can I qualify? That example really clarifies the benefits, explaining our spreadsheet. Now, for our listeners, wondering if they qualify, what are the main criteria? Let us go to our next slide.
Right. So, can I qualify? Do you plan to live in the home full time? That has to be a yes answer. Do you meet the income and purchase limits? So they do have income limits with Minnesota Housing. The income limits can go up to $197,900 statewide based upon the program. So it isn't just for smaller incomes. The Old National Bank is $105,360 applicant income. The house prices can go up to $515,200 in the 11 county metro area. It's 3% down. Fixed rates, they do fixed rates. We're not talking about ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. We're not talking about balloon loans. You're going to meet income and purchase price limits. You have to be working with an approved lender such as myself at Old National Bank. And we'll take you through and we'll see what you qualify for. There are also FHA, rural housing, and VA loans that you can qualify for. The Old National Bank DPA, that's the grant, does not companion with FHA, rural housing, or VA. But a VA is zero down, right? FHA might be a better choice because you've had bankruptcy most recently, and FHA is the most forgiving. Well, we'll work through it as best as we can and know how much is going to come from Minnesota Housing, how much is coming from you, and if we need to get the seller to contribute something. There are minimum credit scores with Minnesota Housing. There are 640 to 650 credit score. Old National Bank for their proprietary loan is the 600 minimum credit score. Income limits, we talked about that. And a homebuyer education is required for some programs and borrowers. Really, all the down payment assistance is a homebuyer education requirement. And that's good because you then become familiar with the language of buying a home so that you're speaking the same language and understanding the language that's being spoken to you. What does DPA mean? Down payment assistance, right? So we want to make sure that when you're going through the process, you fully understand it so we can get you into the house and you know what you did rather than saying, I don't know how I got here, but I'm here, right? We want you to be fully informed as you're going through that process. Wouldn't you say, William?
Definitely. I mean, the qualification process is straightforward. As you said it, first they will need to plan to live in the home full time, not renting now. And then second, they must meet specific income and purchase price limits.
Right. And Minnesota Housing is the whole household income, not just the applicant income. So we're going to look at a couple of different programs to make sure we're utilizing the best programs for your family and for your credit scores. What works for you?
Definitely, which varies by program. And then they'll need to be working with an approved lender, such as the Old National Bank, Cynthia Theisen. And if they meet these criteria, there's a good chance that they will qualify for an assistance. So let us look at slide 8, which talks about compliance, safe disclaimer.
Yep. There's
important information there. Unarguably, you will agree with me. But before we move to the next slide, to this slide, I imagine there are some disclaimers that our listeners should be aware of. Now help us understand, Cynthia.
Programs are subject to change without notice. They can decide tomorrow that only people that make $2 an hour qualify. I mean, and I'm being exaggerative, but things can change. So it's important to always stay on top of it with your loan officer. The eligibility, income limits, and funding availability apply. I believe in June of this year, we're going to see all of those things change once again. And assistance is not guaranteed. All loans are subject to credit approval. I know that Old National Bank's money is not running out, and I know that Minnesota Housing's money is not running out. But I do know that there are other down payment assistance programs that the
Hello? Technical difficulties we are experiencing, but just hang in there, sit tight, and our guest will come back. It says device is not connected. For some reason, we are experiencing technical difficulties from our guest. But just hang in there, sit tight, and our guest will come back shortly. But let's go to some musical break.
Pause the beat. You're making that generous monthly contribution. But are you building your legacy? Whether it's your first home or move up.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Stuck in comfort, stuck in fear. That's why I'm staying here. If the pipe begins to leak, I don't even have to speak. But who pays for it really? But that comfort as a cost. Not the equity I lost. While I sit here paying rent, my future cash is already spent. Some days fast, some days slow. That's just how the tenants go. But if you listen to the sound
Every month you send a
All right, okay. Hello?
So, William, I'm trying to
We
get
can
my...
hear you, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Yeah.
Help us understand. I mean, what happened to your face?
So, see if I can figure this out. Sorry about that. I apologize.
No,
So,
not a problem.
So becoming a homeowner is easier than what you think, right? It is meant for you to be able to get through the process as quickly and easily as possible, which is important for you as a homeowner. It's important for you as a buyer to
We apologize for the technical difficulties our guest is experiencing temporarily, but just sit tight down there as we come to the conclusion of today's podcast. But for those of you who are perpetuating yourselves in tenancy, just making those generous contributions on a monthly basis, though they are impressively wrapped in this legal term they call rent. And I always say, not everything that is legal makes sense. And rent is one of them. And so help me understand now, this 2026, I mean, making that generous contributions, building the future of another man. I mean, if it makes sense for you, then, I mean, what can I say? But to the contrary, if it's not making sense, then give me a call or Cynthia a call and let's change your math. So help me understand now, this 2026, what is stopping you from financially forward thinking? As we take a little bit of a musical break.
Contributions flow, helping that investment grow. Legal term, wrapped up in a piece so firm. Legal term, letting all my money burn. Hold up, pause the beat. You're making that generous monthly contribution, but are you building your legacy? Whether it's your first home or move up.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Stuck in comfort, stuck in fear. That's why I'm staying here. If the pipe begins to leak, I don't even have to speak. But who pays for it really? But that comfort as a cost, not the equity I lost. While I sit here paying rent, my future cash is already spent. Some days fast, some days slow. That's just how the tenants go. But if you listen to the sound, it's your money. I'm letting the ground call me.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
All right. So, we have our special guest in studio, who is going to help you all understand, this down payment and how it works.
Sorry about that, William. My internet seems to be glitching here. They put in new fiber optics in my neighborhood, and it seems to be having trouble, so I apologize for that. So programs are subject to change without notice. They can change at any point in time, and I think we're going to see a big change that's going to happen in June. But when those changes happen, usually the income limit increases, which is always wonderful to see. Eligibility, who is the first-time home buyer? Is you're someone who hasn't owned a house for 3 years. So let's say I used to own a house. I sold it several years ago. Now I want to buy again. But I am a first-time home buyer again if I have not owned in 36 months and 1 day. So that makes me a first-time home buyer again. Or if I'm married to my husband, and now I am considered a displaced homemaker, someone who is no longer in the house.
I can be eligible under a first-time home buyer program as well. So eligibilities are not just limited to somebody who's never owned a home. It can be somebody who hasn't owned a home in the last 3 years. It can be somebody that's displaced, maybe a fire happened. Assistance is not guaranteed. You have to qualify for the assistance, and all loans are subject to credit approval. So you can't have crappy credit, but you have credit that is that you're struggling on a credit journey with. Come to me. Let's pull credit. Let's see what we can do for you. I'll put you on a plan. I'll let you know what you need to do. I've been doing that for years, and sometimes it takes people 4 months and they're great. Sometimes it takes people 3 years and they're great. But whatever your journey or your path will allow you to do, let's start. I mean, why sit in credit despair? Let's get you credit certified so that you can become a true homeowner.
All right. You heard it. I mean, it's crucial to remember that programs are subject to change without notice. Eligibility, income limits, and funding availability all apply, and assistance is never guaranteed. My advice is always to get the most up-to-date information for your specific situation. So let us roll out to the next slide, okay? It should be slide 9. The next step and questions. Thank you for that important clarification, Cynthia, for our listeners who are now eager to explore these options. I mean, what are their next steps? Help us understand.
Well, they should call you, William, and then you and that customer will call me together, and we'll take a look. We'll put some information into the computer, or I can send you a link, but we'll pull credit, and we'll review your situation. Everybody's situation is different. So let's review that situation together. Once we review it, we'll explore the available assistance options that are out there for you, and ask as many questions as you want, because I'm here, William's here. We're both here to help you get through this process to become a homeowner, and not become a homeowner 5-10 years from now, to become a homeowner now, or as you develop your challenge credit into something that's a vehicle so that you can go out and purchase.
That's an excellent advice, Cynthia. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I mean, this has been incredibly informative as usual.
But thank you. I'm sorry for the glitches. I apologize.
Not a problem. That was technical difficulties, which is beyond your control. So thank you again. Thank you very much. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, William. Bye now.
Thank you very much.
Call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future. Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Now let's take a look at a situation of renting benefit as a method opposed to you are perpetuating yourself in benefit.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Because every month you send a check, you call it rent. You call it what? A generous contribution. As you can get the man over there. So, this is the situation now. Take a critical look at this. Okay? Now, if you look at the beautiful house on the left of your screen, I would say This home is a premier split level design, okay? Very cool style. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathroom, 3 garage stall. And 1,700 square feet. Was built 2019, which means it is still new. It has what? 1,700 square feet of space. Living space. Now, this is a perfect example of a home, right? Now, what can you expect? Buying the house, the big start. Now, buying a home costs a lot of money at the beginning, but it's an investment in your future. And sometimes the sellers can help. In this case, take for example, we sell that home, bought 5 years ago. We assisted the buyers with $12,750 to help with the cost. Those extra costs are called what? Closing costs. Getting help makes it easier for them to start. And this is why all of you look for when you are buying a home, a down payment assistance. The house grows like a piggy bank. We all know when we have a piggy bank, we put money in over time. And the piggy bank begins to what? To fill over time. Okay? Now, 5 years ago, the same house we bought for $300,000. Brand new. Today we sell it at over $400,000. Say $419,000. 5 years ago, this house was bought for $300,000. Today it's worth what? $419,000. That extra money what? Belongs to you who bought that house there 5 years ago at $300,000. Unlike the purchase of vehicles or what? Those other things that you buy that does not appreciate in value. The value of a home appreciates over time. And this is the reason why we tell people that the best investment is what? The one that appreciates over time, that grows in value over time. 5 years ago, we bought this house at $300,000. And today we were fortunate to sell it for what? $419,000. The total growth on this house was $119,000. But if you have rented for the past 5 years and you are leaving that place, you will leave it only with your personal belongings. Whereas all of those 5 years you have built the bank account of the landlord, the one who owns the property. You have what? Invested in the growth of their investment. So for those of you who keeps what? Making these generous contributions you call rent. I mean, help me understand. See this beautiful home, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 3 garage stall. It may not be as similar as this one, but whatever home you buy, this is the advantage of renting versus owning. Now let's look at how do they compare. Money over time. Owning like this house, okay? It may be more expensive. With renting, you pay the landlord every month, and that money does not come to you. But over time, you gain equity. You may be the one doing repairs, and maybe because you don't want to do repairs, you find it comfortable in renting, but count the cost of the equity that you lose over time. Selling a house can take some time and it takes a lot of effort. And moving is easy. That might be another reason that you will stick to what the comfort of renting. But I would encourage you to count the cost of the equity that you lose over time and gain by the one who owns the property that you are. You pay or make that generous contributions on a monthly basis that you call rent. Owning is a giant piggy bank. It costs more at first, but your house can become worth much more than you pay for it over time. As you saw, we bought this house 5 years ago for 300,000, and we sold it 5 years later for almost 420,000. See how much we were able to walk away with. But renting is like paying for a service. It's easier because you don't have to fix big problems, but you don't get money back. No matter how long you stay in that place or how nice you were to the property landlord or how well you maintain the property, you were only a generous contributor. So for those of you who are perpetuating yourselves in tenancy, just making those generous contributions on a monthly basis, help me understand this 2026, what is stopping you from financially forward thinking? And perpetuating yourselves in tenancy, just making those generous contributions on a monthly basis. Help me understand.
William Karpeh, helping you buy, sell, and invest with confidence. Pick up the phone, let's change the path. Call or text me 1651-33044.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Let's make it simple. Let's make it smart. Forward thinking. Forward living. No. Yeah. It's time to talk about the elephant in the room. This shit William Karpeh. You're a real talk. We talking Minnesota.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
But first, let me ask you. Help me understand.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future. Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future. Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Every check that I have sent vanished in the void of breath. Stop the vanishing out. Yeah. Forward thinking, that's the key to break the chain of tendency. Stop the generous supply. It is time for me to buy. Let's turn. How I make the.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Yeah. Don't perpetuate yourself in Tennessee. Take the move. William Karpeh, helping you buy, sell, and invest with confidence. Pick up the phone, let's change the path. Call or text me 1651-33044.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
William Karpeh, you're a real thug. We talking Minnesota.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
But first, let me ask you. Help me understand.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future. Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
William Karpeh, you're a real thug.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
But first, let me ask you. Help me understand what is stopping you from financially forward thinking. Let's go. Yeah. Wake up, check the bank account. Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new. Generous is what I do. Walking down the leasing street. Cycle that I just repeat. Money rushing left and right. Gone before the end of night. Don't know the
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
It's impressively rap, but it's still a trap. Forward thinking, not too late. Tendency is to get them stay. Generous contributions flow. Helping that investment grow. They gon' turn, they gon' turn, they gon' turn. Wrapped up in the be so firm. They gon' turn, they gon' turn, they gon' turn. Letting all my money burn. Hold up, pause the beat. You're making that generous monthly contribution. But are you building your legacy? Whether it's your first home or move up.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Yeah, justified, yeah. Stuck in comfort, stuck in fear. That's why I'm staying here. If the pipe begins to leak, I don't even have to speak. But who pays for it really? But that comfort as a cost. Not the equity I lost. While I sit here paying rent, my future cash is already spent. Some days fast, some days slow. That's just how the tenants go. But if you listen to the sound, it's your money. Don't let it hit the ground, call me.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future. Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
The future that you lose. Every check that I have sent vanished in the void of rent. Stop the vanishing out. Yeah. Forward thinking, that's the key to break the chain of tendency. Stop the trend of resupply. It is time for me to buy. Let's turn. How I make the
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Yeah. Don't perpetuate yourself in Tennessee. Make the move. William Karpeh. Helping you buy, sell, and invest with confidence. Pick up the phone, let's change the path. Call or text me. 1651-33044.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Let's make it simple. Let's make it smart. Karpeh, you're a real thug. We talking Minnesota.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
But first, let me ask you. Help me understand.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future. Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
William Karpeh, you're a real thug.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
But first, let me ask you. Help me understand what is stopping you from financially forward thinking. Let's go. Yeah. Wake up, check the bank account. Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new. Generous is what I do. Walking down the leasing street. Cycle that I just repeat. Money rushing left and right. Gone before the end of night. Don't know the route, don't know the.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future. Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
But first, let me ask you. Help me understand what is stopping you from financially forward thinking. Let's go. Yeah. Wake up, check the bank account. Watch the numbers running out. Send the check to someone new. Generous is what I do. Walking down the leasing street. Cycle that I just repeat. Money rushing left and right. Gone before the end of night. Don't know the route, don't know the.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Contributions flow, helping that investment grow. They gon' turn, wrapped up in a piece so firm. They gon' turn, letting all my money burn. Hold up, pause the beat. You're making that generous monthly contribution, but are you building your legacy? Whether it's your first home or move up.
Every month you send a check. You call it rent. I call it a generous contribution to someone else's future.
Yeah, stuck in comfort, stuck in fear.